Somewhere between 3 and 6 times a night, every human being on Earth enters a state of consciousness so vivid, so strange, and so completely convincing that for the duration of it, the sleeping brain genuinely believes it is real. You fly. You speak to people who have been dead for years. You find yourself back in a school you haven't seen since childhood, except the hallways lead somewhere they never actually led. And then, almost without exception, within minutes of waking up, the entire experience begins dissolving, and, within 20 minutes, it is largely gone, leaving behind nothing but a faint residual mood and the frustrating sense that something important just slipped away before you could grab hold of it. This happens to every person, every single night, and yet most people have never seriously asked why the brain would build something this elaborate only to delete it almost immediately. The answer turns out to involve some of the strangest architecture in the entire human nervous system. To understand why dreams disappear so quickly, it helps to first understand what dreaming actually is at a neurological level, because the popular image of dreaming as some kind of internal movie being watched by a passive viewer is almost completely wrong. Most vivid dreaming occurs during a stage of sleep called REM sleep, named for the rapid eye movements that occur during this phase, and brain imaging studies conducted on sleeping subjects have revealed something that initially surprised researchers. During REM sleep, large areas of the brain associated with visual processing, emotion, and memory of personal experience become highly active, in some cases more active than during ordinary waking consciousness. The brain during a dream is not passively receiving a pre-recorded show. It is actively generating an entire sensory and emotional experience from scratch, constructing sight, sound, physical sensation, and complex emotional context in real time, using almost the same neural machinery it would use to process a genuinely lived experience while awake. The specific brain regions involved in this process tell a revealing story about why dreams vanish so completely. The amygdala, a small almond-shaped structure deep in the brain responsible for processing emotion, particularly fear and threat detection, becomes intensely active during REM sleep, which is part of why dreams so often carry a strong emotional charge, whether that charge is anxiety, joy, confusion, or dread. The visual cortex, responsible for processing what we see, becomes active as well, generating the vivid imagery that makes dreams feel so real while they're happening. But the prefrontal cortex, the region of the brain responsible for logical reasoning, self-awareness, and critical judgment, becomes significantly less active during REM sleep than during waking consciousness. This is why dreams so often contain events that would be obviously impossible or absurd if you were awake and thinking clearly, but feel completely unremarkable while the dream is happening. Your critical, reality-checking brain is largely offline, which is precisely why a dream can involve losing all your teeth, or attending a meeting with a person who died a decade ago, without triggering the alarm bells that would immediately go off during waking life. The most important piece of this puzzle, though, and the one most directly responsible for the near-total amnesia that follows every dream, involves a structure called the hippocampus, which functions as something close to the brain's memory formation headquarters. Under normal waking conditions, the hippocampus is constantly working to convert short-term sensory experience into long-term, retrievable memory, a process called memory consolidation that typically requires certain neurochemical conditions to function properly. Research, using brain imaging and neurochemical analysis, has found that during REM sleep, the communication between the hippocampus and other memory-related brain regions, particularly the prefrontal cortex, is significantly disrupted compared to waking consciousness. The specific neurotransmitters required for strong memory consolidation, particularly norepinephrine, drop to extremely low levels during REM sleep, which appears to directly impair the hippocampus's ability to properly encode the dream experience into a stable, retrievable long-term memory, in the same way it would encode a waking experience. This creates a genuinely strange situation inside the sleeping brain. An intensely vivid, emotionally charged, sensorially rich experience is being actively generated and experienced in real time, but the neurochemical machinery required to actually save that experience for later retrieval is functioning at a fraction of its normal capacity. It is, in a sense, similar to experiencing something extraordinary while a camera is recording with almost no memory card space left, capturing brief fragments here and there, but losing the overwhelming majority of the footage before it can ever be properly saved. This explains a pattern that dream researchers have documented repeatedly. People who are woken up directly during REM sleep, in the middle of active dreaming, report vivid and detailed dream recall far more often than people who wake up naturally after REM sleep has already ended, because the memory has not yet had the chance to fully decay in the brief window between the end of the dream and full wakefulness. There is also a compelling evolutionary explanation for why the brain might have been shaped this way, and it centers on a question that becomes obvious once you consider what would happen if dreams were remembered with the same clarity and permanence as waking experiences. If the brain treated every dream as a fully consolidated, richly detailed memory indistinguishable in strength from real waking experiences, the result would be a serious and potentially dangerous problem: an inability to reliably distinguish between things that actually happened and things that were only dreamed. Some researchers who study memory and cognition have proposed that the rapid forgetting of dreams may function as a protective mechanism, preventing the brain's memory systems from becoming cluttered with vivid but entirely fictional experiences that could otherwise interfere with accurate recall of real events, real relationships, and real dangers encountered during waking life. A brain that clearly and permanently remembered a dream about betrayal by a trusted friend, for example, might carry residual suspicion or altered behavior toward that friend the next day, based entirely on an event that never actually happened. The rapid dissolution of dream memory may exist specifically to prevent this kind of confusion between the imagined and the real. Sleep researchers have also proposed that dreaming itself, regardless of whether the specific content is remembered afterward, may serve important cognitive functions that do not actually require conscious recall to be effective, which would explain why evolution might not have prioritized memory retention for dream content in the first place. One influential theory, sometimes called the threat simulation theory, proposes that dreaming, particularly the anxiety-laden and threat-heavy dreams that are extremely common across cultures, functions as a kind of low-stakes rehearsal space, where the brain can simulate dangerous or emotionally difficult scenarios and practice responses to them without the real-world consequences of actually experiencing that danger while awake. Under this theory, the value of the dream lies entirely in the neural rehearsal itself, the strengthening of certain response pathways through simulated practice, rather than in the conscious memory of having had the experience. A gazelle that mentally rehearses evading a predator gains a survival advantage regardless of whether it consciously remembers the specific rehearsal afterward, and some researchers argue human dreaming may function in a structurally similar way. Other researchers have focused on dreaming's apparent role in emotional processing and memory consolidation of waking experiences, proposing that REM sleep may function partly as a period during which the brain works through emotionally significant events from waking life, integrating them into existing memory networks and, in some cases, reducing the emotional intensity attached to difficult or traumatic memories. Studies using brain imaging have found that during REM sleep, levels of norepinephrine, the same stress-related neurotransmitter mentioned earlier in connection with memory consolidation, drop to their lowest point of the entire sleep cycle, creating what some researchers have described as a neurochemically calm environment in which the brain can reprocess emotionally charged memories without the same intensity of stress response that occurred during the original waking experience. Under this model, the strange, often symbolic, sometimes disturbing content of dreams may represent the brain working through emotional material, using its own peculiar associative logic, a process whose therapeutic value, again, does not require the dreamer to consciously remember the specific narrative content afterward for the underlying emotional processing to have taken place. The specific mechanics of forgetting, once you understand the underlying brain chemistry, also help explain several strange features of dream memory that almost everyone has experienced but rarely stops to examine. The reason dreams seem to fade specifically in the first few minutes after waking, rather than remaining stable and then disappearing later in the day, relates directly to the abrupt transition the brain makes as it shifts from the REM neurochemical state back into full waking consciousness. As norepinephrine and other neurotransmitters return to normal waking levels within moments of waking, the brain's memory consolidation systems come back online, but by that point, the dream content that was never properly encoded in the first place has nothing solid to consolidate. This is also why the classic advice to keep a notebook by the bed and write down dreams immediately upon waking is neurologically sound rather than just a folk remedy, since even a brief conscious rehearsal of dream content in the moments immediately after waking, while some fragile trace of the dream is still accessible, appears to give the memory enough of a foothold to survive the transition into fully consolidated waking memory that it would otherwise never achieve on its own. There is also a curious and consistent finding that people tend to remember emotionally intense dreams, particularly nightmares, more reliably than emotionally neutral ones, a pattern that connects directly back to the amygdala's heightened activity during REM sleep. Because the amygdala plays a significant role in tagging experiences as emotionally significant, and because this tagging process appears to partially survive the broader disruption of memory consolidation during REM sleep, dreams carrying an intense emotional charge seem to receive a small additional boost toward survival compared to emotionally flat dream content, which may explain why so many people report remembering their nightmares in vivid detail, while barely recalling the mundane dreams that likely occurred on the same night, but carried no particular emotional weight. What emerges from all of this research is a picture of dreaming as a genuinely strange evolutionary compromise, an experience elaborate enough to actively simulate threats, process emotions, and potentially strengthen certain neural pathways, but built on top of a memory system that was never designed and may have been actively shaped by evolution, not to preserve the experience once its underlying function had been served. The dream is not a failed memory. It is closer to a message that was never intended to be permanently filed away in the first place, its value delivered entirely in the moment of its occurrence, rather than in any lasting record of what happened. Every night, your brain builds an entire world, populates it with emotion and meaning, and impossible physics, walks you through it with total conviction that it is real, and then, having apparently gotten whatever benefit it needed from the exercise, closes the file and lets it go, almost as though remembering were never really the point at all.